A lot of people are paying more attention to the truth. There's a lot of people that are tuning into the alternative media, and I think we'll probably see some sort of clampdown, whether they try to invoke a fairness doctrine or whether they try to have some sort of controls on internet activity, whether it's blogging or video blogging. I don't know what they'll try, but desperate times call for desperate measures, and when the powers that be feel desperate, there's no limit to what they might try.
Yeah, you're right. You know, it was H.G. Wells that said about the New World Order, and I quote, "Countless millions will protest against the New World Order and will die fighting it." It seems to me that he was very prescient in that quote now, because who would have guessed 20 years ago or even 10 years ago that so many people across the planet would be awake to this debt-based fiat bankster system, and awake enough to be in the streets marching and fighting against it. I think this plan for a one-world government is either deadly on track or it's way off track. I don't think there's much of an in-between, and I'd like to think that they're way off track because too many of us have woken up.
Well, there's a lot of people waking up, but we have to be very careful, though, that the alternative that's brought up isn't worse than what we're seeing right now, because there's also some voices out there that are trying to co-opt things like the Occupy movement, who are big government advocates. They want totalitarian government in a different form. They want it in the name of the people. And they're essentially Trotskyites when you come right down to it. So we've got to be careful that in attempting to reveal the evils of the fiat banking system, that we don't end up with, instead of a legitimate banking system, which would be warehouse banking, that we instead end up with global governance and a global currency which is not backed by specie. So be very careful. Keep your eyes open. Pay very little attention to what people say. Pay a little bit less attention to what people do, but pay the most attention to the results of what they do. That's all that really matters. Rhetoric is meaningless.
No, you're absolutely right. What brilliant insight. I mean, it's the Hegelian dialectic, right? It's this problem, reaction, solution. That's what scares those of us who are awake about what could happen in a collapse, is that those that cause the collapse will then pose as our saviors and roll out some other phony system that may well be worse than the one we have, which could take us right into a one-world government, a one-world governance. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, we do have to be vigilant. And again, it's only the people that are well prepared who will be in a position to speak up. So that's one of the reasons I stress family preparedness as much as I do. And in fact, I think that's a good segue into talking about just that. People need to get their beans, bullets, and Band-Aids together, and they need to team up with like-minded friends and neighbors so they can be part of the solution. Every family that's well stocked up, every family with a year's supply of food in its larder, represents one less family that's rushing to the grocery store at the 11th hour and cleaning out the shelves. So instead of being part of the problem, we'll be part of the solution.
Now, you're talking to an audience that is very well informed, and many of the folks are even more prepared than I am. Do you want to take us through maybe your top 5 or top 10 must-haves in a collapse situation, or what would you like to talk about? I mean,
yeah, it's opening up a huge bucket of worms. I guess first and foremost, again, take full advantage of the archives at Survival Blog. There's thousands of articles and posts there with a tremendous amount of detail about family preparedness. And there's a lot to it. You have to basically make yourself a list of lists and tailor those lists to your own stage of life and your own geography. And if people go to survivalblog.com, in the left-hand column, if they click on the little link to list of lists, it'll actually bring up an Excel spreadsheet that people can tailor for themselves. And it really prioritizes that top 10, or in this case, top 200 things that people would need to do. And if people are on a tight budget, they need to be even more conscious of prioritizing. I always stress balance in preparation. I constantly am running into people who are, for example, ham radio enthusiasts who have every piece of radio equipment known to man, but don't have much food storage.
Right.
Or shooters, for example, who have these wonderful gun collections, but actually not all that much ammunition because they want to collect every particular type of gun and they're not worried about having 1,000 rounds for each gun. Or doctors who have every medical supply known to man, but know nothing about communications equipment. So, again, balance is very important. And, again, if you are on a tight budget, prioritizing each of your purchases is even more important. If you're wealthy, you can afford to make a few mistakes. If you're middle class, looking at our potential future, you can't afford to make mistakes. You need to have everything right. And, stock up on a few extra barter items or precious metals so you can, if you do make a few minor mistakes, you can barter your way into what you do need.
I, like so many others, are guilty of that same myopic way of looking at things sometimes, and I need to personally have more balance. So I think this is a great, clarion call for people to realize that there's still time left to dot some I's and cross some T's and check some things off the list. Let me ask you about being quiet, being private, trying to plan smartly but plan quietly, because so many of us have a hard time waking up friends and family, even about the very easily understandable financial collapse and the criminality, right? That should be easy for people to understand. What's harder for people to, I think, understand is the need for prep, because they've been brainwashed into thinking that you're a tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist if you think that the dollar's going to go away and we might hit hyperinflation. They can't imagine that they would need a basement filled with food or toilet paper, much less guns and ammo. My point is how important is it to be smart and to be private in your preparation?
Well, I think it is important that you be perspicacious. Now, I don't think people should be absolute secret squirrels and, so quietly squirrel away a supply for their family that they don't warn their neighbors or fellow church congregants, for example. But just be careful about the way you do it. You need to encourage people to stock up. You don't need to mention exactly how much food you have, where it's located, and so forth. That's dangerous information. You want to be very quiet about your preparations, but I know it sounds like a contradiction, but you also have to be outspoken in encouraging other people to prepare. So network quietly, and then you have to be very careful in feeling people out. You don't want to just lay all your cards on the table to a neighbor that you might hardly know, okay? Start out slow. Talk about local threats. Say your listener is in California. You should be talking to your neighbors about the earthquake risk and active steps to prepare families to be ready for the aftermath of an earthquake, or to be prepared to secure their house in the event of an earthquake. So feel people out very carefully. Proceed with caution. Don't lay all your cards on the table early on. It shouldn't be until after you've known someone for weeks or months and you know exactly where they're coming from that you should have any willingness to talk about the depth of your logistics, for example.
How did you get so darn smart when it comes to all this, survival and prep? Are you former military or police?
Yes. I was an Army intelligence officer. I got out as a captain. I resigned my commission immediately after Bill Clinton was sworn into office. I didn't like the idea of him being my commander-in-chief, and since my secure obligation was up at that point, I went ahead and resigned my commission. As an intelligence officer, I was primarily in the signals intelligence field, but I also had exposure to a lot of different country studies, for example, and those led me to realize how fragile how many Western societies are. And in fact, our own society is particularly vulnerable because we have a tremendous dependence on the power grid and telecommunications. We have very long chains of supply, and a society, unfortunately, that's become very cushy. We have a soft society where everything's provided for us, and people's idea of roughing it is going out camping with every gadget known to man for a weekend and having prepackaged foods, and might come home with singed fingers or maybe a little damp, but that's their idea of roughing it. They have no clue about what the collapse of Western civilization might look like.
Well, it is frightening, especially as we take a look at these inner cities and these major American cities that have been deindustrialized, absolutely decaying from within, and a population that is so dependent largely on the government in so many ways. It's really terrifying, and I would imagine that based on the fact that, even in the Great Depression, I think we were an 80 to 90% agrarian society with so many farmers, and these days the numbers are reversed. 90%, aren't farmers, 95% don't farm and have no access to a garden. The last place you're going to want to be in a collapse is one of these big cities.
Absolutely. I do recommend that people strategically relocate if they have the chance, and there's a number of good books on that topic. One by Joel Skousen titled Strategic Relocation is an absolute must. People need to think seriously about relocating. If because of their family situation or work situation they can't relocate, they should at least team up with country cousins or friends that live out in the countryside. Preposition the majority of your storage food and other key logistics. Make plans in advance so that you can at least get out of Dodge at the 11th hour. It's not the ideal situation. The ideal situation, of course, is to live at your retreat year-round, but I recognize that most people can't do that. So do the best you can.
One of the challenges of anyone interviewing someone like you is that you're such a wealth of knowledge. It's like trying to give the cliff notes from an encyclopedia. Is there anything else we should touch on before I let you go at all? Anything really vital that you think we haven't spoken about that we really ought to?
Well, I think the most important thing is that people team up and stock up, and even for people that are stuck in an urban environment living in a tiny little apartment, you can at least grow sprouts. You can at least learn some practical skills. You can at least assemble a library of practical skills books. And one that I highly recommend is about ready to come out in a new edition. That's Carla Emery's Encyclopedia of Country Living. It's about ready to come out in its 40th anniversary edition. And Amazon is already taking pre-orders for that book. If I had to name one book that I would consider an absolute must for being able to start from scratch to revert to 19th century technology, it would be that book. Again, it's the Encyclopedia of Country Living by Carla Emery, E-M-E-R-Y. So yes, get smart on all this, folks, and don't just study and read. You need to practice. It's going to take some sweat. It's going to take getting your hands dirty. But you need to. There's a steep learning curve with things like gardening. You need to master that now. You don't want to be mastering that after everything's hit the fan, because the implications of a failed crop now are merely an inconvenience. You just have to go to the store and buy what you're short. The full implications of a crop failure after everything falls apart are devastating. We're talking starvation. So make the mistakes now. Master the learning curves now. And again, if you have the chance, move now.
It was so interesting for me to hear you say 19th century technology, and what it sparked, it reminded me of this TED Talk that Bill Gates gave, in which he was talking about the absolute necessity, the scientific imperative that absolutely, must be done, that we reduce all carbon emissions to zero over the next 2 decades or whatever it is. And I posted that at SGT Report again recently, even though he gave that speech, I think, better than a year ago or whatever. But it's because these insane elite seem to want to take us back to that pre-industrial age living. They truly want us to be serfs again, because the way I've discerned this is that if we're going to ban carbon emissions, and they want zero carbon emissions. They want to turn us all back into serfs. I mean, unless they're going to release some sort of
freezing in the dark.
Yeah, I mean, unless they're going to give us, cold fusion or some hidden new technology, they just want to control the planet and have us be serfs.
And in essence, I think you're right. The scary thing is that by their own admission, they want to depopulate the planet by about 2/3.
Right.
That's not great if you happen to be one of the people that's in their gun sights.
You're right. It's just horrifying. Well, James Wesley Rawles, I really do appreciate your time, and I just want to stress for everybody on the pre-call here about 2 minutes of conversation before we started recording. You said that you like to come on and spread the word. This isn't even about promoting your books in your own words. It's about getting the word out, and I just really do appreciate, where your heart is at on this thing, and that you really truly want to help people, because that's what it's all about. At the end of the day, we're all in this mess together, and the more of us that are prepared, the better.
Amen to that. Thank you so much for having me on, SGT.
Thanks for calling.
Well, thanks again. God bless.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
Well, thanks for watching. I don't say it enough. I sure appreciate your support. And be sure to check out thelibertymill.com. Real news 24/7. Thanks for watching.